week of the 2020 NFL season is mostly in the books. We're here to break things down and talk about all the usages, snap rates, and information you didn't know as you get set for week number 4. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sadas. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire. Brandon, how did week 3 go for you?
It was good. It was bad. It just
It was good. It was bad. What?
Yeah, depends on the lineup. I got a little bit in my own head, and by lineup lock, I decided to fade a lot of DeAndre Hopkins, which, was fine. I also was a little bit out on Calvin Ridley because I think they were fantastic process plays, but in a tournament, I just felt like it was the right call. Calvin Ridley almost erupted for a third straight week. I think he told me he had like 249 air yards or something. Yeah. Something nuts. But
he also had like 100 yards in the first. No, not 100. It was like basically 100 in the first quarter. And I also was underweight on him, and I was petrified. Yeah.
And we loved Miles Sanders and Jonathan Taylor, and they didn't really, go off. They weren't terrible. So, had some good lineups, had some core plays that didn't really pan out the way that I wanted. So it was good and it was bad, Jim.
Okay. You kind of explained that well enough, I guess. Like, I'll give you partial credit for it. It was still kind of a weird way, but whatever. I'll take it.
It's me. What do you expect?
Kind of weird. Okay, fair. We're just trying to live up to the status quo here. Mine was good. I had the same core plays as you at running back. Like Zeke didn't do a ton. Miles Sanders, Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, that's not great, but because I just had a lot of Tyler Lockett, things went pretty well. I think that he erased a lot of mistakes that I may have made, he and Russ. So it's helpful when you can have players who have the capability of making up for mistakes that you have elsewhere. And a lot of players who can do that are players on the Seattle Seahawks right now. So that game, living up to the hype, saved me a lot of money.
Yeah. It was a strange week because to me it was going to be which of the shootout games of the two between the Arizona Detroit game and Seattle Dallas, which of these games are going to be great. And it felt like for like the first hour of the 1 p.m. slate, it was like, well, if you didn't stack those two games,
right,
you don't have a shot. But a lot of those games ended up with a lot of points by the end. So it just was hard to get a read on like the whole entire slate. And another thing that contributed to that is usually once the 1 o'clock games end, I start taking notes and doing the, running down through my games that I'm about to talk about. But there were 5 afternoon games, and it's harder to look away whenever there's 5 instead of 2.
Also, they were 5, like 2 really good games.
Yeah.
So that makes it even tougher. The other 3 were not as great. But maybe you can put Chargers, Carolina in there, like not from a DFS, kind of from I don't know, whatever.
It almost ends on a hook and ladder touchdown. It's a good game.
Fair enough. Let's dive in here to the game-by-game recap, starting off with Thursday night. Running back action here, Brandon, with both Myles Gaskin and James Robinson doing work. Pretty fun night for people who decided to get in on bad backfields, but definitely paid off in week 3.
Yeah, I think the 2 running backs were the real takeaways from me. Myles Gaskin had 22 carries and 66 yards, also 5 targets for another 29 yards. That is 32 adjusted opportunities, which is a pretty rare number. Adjusted opportunities, carries plus 2x targets, because the average target for a running back is worth about twice as many fantasy points compared to a carry. He had 10 carries and 3 targets in the first half as well. Wound up with a 75% snap rate according to NFL.com. He's now played at least 63% of the snaps in every game so far. I know it is not a stellar offense, but that's really tough to hate on. He also is getting targets with 4, 7, and 5 through his 3 games. Just 20 pass attempts from Ryan Fitzpatrick, though he did throw for 2 touchdowns, ran 7 times after getting 8 through the first 2 games. He kind of keeps the offense viable. According to numberFire's metrics, he's at 0.10 passing net expected points per dropback. The NFL average usually hovers around 0.11 or so over the last season. It's a little bit higher than that right now in 2020, but he does enough to keep this team pretty interesting. Nobody else had more than 5 targets, though. Devonte Parker and Myles Gaskin had 5. Parker had 69 yards, which is very nice, but he was the only one to clear 30. So not the greatest, production here, but Devonte Parker did play 92% of the snaps. The only other skill position player to get above 70% other than Myles Gaskin. The market shares overall through 3 games, not great. 20% for Mike Gesicki, 18% for Devonte, and it's 19 if you exclude week 1. So still not anything stellar, but Gesicki has really good usage, 2.3 downfield targets per game, 1.7 red zone targets per game, which is pretty elite for a tight end. They host the Seahawks in week 4, so they're going to have to run way more plays and throw a lot more. So I definitely don't think they're unstackable in a bring back situation. For the Jaguars, James Robinson played 30 snaps, which is 45%, which was the same as Chris Thompson in a game where the Jaguars trailed. Robinson, though, had 11 of 17 rushes, 6 of 42 targets for a team-high 83 receiving yards. I'm really not going out of my way to play Robinson in DFS because of the offense, but if there's ever a viable spot, I will consider him with that usage. And even without DJ Chark and 42 pass attempts, no receiver really stepped up. 9 different Jaguars had a target. My boy Chris Conley led with 8. He led in snap rate as well at 80%. I know he had 2 drops, but he had 5 catchable targets. So keep that in mind. And 5 of his targets were downfield. Conley really does get a lot of downfield work. So I think he's at least interesting from that standpoint. This team just hasn't thrown it to anyone heavily yet, even when Chark was healthy. Keelan Cole leads the team at 16% of the targets. Conley's at 15%. Chark's at 11% in the games he played. And then if you were looking for the Laviska Shenault game, he did play 68% of the snaps, but had just 1 carry and 6 targets. Gardner Minshew's fine. I know people think he's playing quite well, but just 13 downfield attempts through 3 games. It's kind of a tough offense to love with so few downfield attempts, but they are at the Bengals next week. Maybe that's like one of those messy, affordable games to stack up, but probably not going to be too into that one overall.
I think that the Miami-Seattle game is really interesting because, like you said, Ryan Fitzpatrick kind of keeps that team afloat. I think it's tougher for Gaskin just because the game script might not be too pretty, but Gesicki is really interesting because I agree with you that the workload, especially from a high leverage perspective, is really good. So name that salary for Mike Gesicki at home against Seattle next week.
So it's tough because we always want our tight ends to be favored and have high implied team totals just for touchdown equity, but
their implied total is still pretty meaty because the total in the game is 54.
Okay, I was trying to look up the total there.
It's 54. That's awesome. I love Seattle.
Honestly, I would pay based on what else is available at tight end. Usually, I would probably go like 59.
Okay.
For Gesicki. Too high? Too low?
I thought 63.
Okay.
So only $400 gap. I guess that's not that much. But for week number 4, Mike Gesicki checks in at below both of us. He is 57. Okay. So I'm not sure. This is a first look thing, so we don't know the composition of the slate. But I would say Gesicki viable for cash at that number. Is that the right way to phrase that, or do you disagree?
No, I think that's right. Okay. My first thought was honestly 6,000, but you still have to put it in the context of the offense. There aren't going to be as many touchdowns as some other tight ends will have access to. So I don't want to get out over my skis and say Mike Gesicki's a $6,500 player on the Dolphins offense.
I hope we get a vintage Fitzmagic game, and we can just let that game go nuts. In week 3 of the FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League, it was Russa J. Low L0. I don't know, actually. Russ Edge Low, whatever, who got the win. He's also a good and respectful question asker on Twitter. He made sure to tweet at us, let us know that he got the win there. So congratulations to you on that one, and a member of the Heat Check family for taking this one down. Got the win despite having Dallas Goedert get hurt. That's what happens when you stack Russ, Lockett, and Gallup, in addition to having Allen Robinson, Derrick Henry, and James freaking Conner. So
if he played Michael Gallup, we know he's a Heat Check guy.
Right. And I really hope that lineup was in – no, it's a dude. Yeah, but you're right. But I was talking with him yesterday, so we're good. But I hope this lineup was another contest because it was really good. So once the week 4 listener league is posted, you'll be able to enter by going to FanDuel.com/league/listener league. That's FanDuel.com/league/listener league. I'll also include a link to enter in the post of the week 4 preview podcast. Let's move now to one of the games we liked in the early slate as being a sneaky stack, and it actually did wind up being pretty fun. That was the Rams at the Bills, where Josh Allen gave you the full Josh Allen 2020 experience. And I say 2020 experience because if it was the full Josh Allen 2019 experience, it'd be a few good plays and a lot of head scratchers. The 2020 experience is more a couple of head scratchers and some really fun plays. He threw for 311 yards, 4 touchdowns and a pick. Also had a short rushing touchdown. He had an option keeper that came up just short of the goal line later on. But on top of that, he had a terrible strip sack and a unsportsmanlike conduct penalty that helped give the Rams the lead, a face mask penalty before he threw the game-winning touchdown, which he might not have had to have thrown had he not gotten called for unsportsmanlike conduct. There's going to be some very interesting games this year. The closer the game, the more I love Allen for fantasy. He always has a high floor because of the rushing, but he keeps solidifying what he showed the first 2 weeks. Even if the hero ball nonsense is still something he will do, that's okay. Like a fumble or a pick doesn't bother us too much for DFS. So Josh Allen, obviously a great fantasy quarterback and solidifying himself as being a very viable real-world quarterback because, again, the Rams defense has played pretty well so far this year. John Brown, unfortunately, got hurt again. He injured his calf. It opened up 7 targets for Cole Beasley and 4 for Gabriel Davis. Davis is kind of fun as a prospect, so I'd be interested in him if he were to get a firmer role. But a Brown injury would hurt the offense's efficiency, I would think. It wouldn't bother Stephon Diggs too much. He dealt with Jalen Ramsey, still at 6 targets. He is at 25% of the targets through 3 games with 33% of the deep targets. So that's with there being a couple of tough cornerback matchups in there, specifically Ramsey this past week. So I feel really good about Diggs. Davis is on my radar as a lower salary guy if Brown misses time, and hopefully they don't keep throwing to Lee Smith and Tyler Kroft because that was the worst. Devin Singletary's role, similar to what he had down the stretch last year with Zach Moss being out on Sunday. 13 carries and 5 targets for Singletary. That is 23 adjusted opportunities. He played 89% of the snaps, and he did get 2 carries inside the 5, one of which was a direct snap, which means they're scheming up touches for him. We like that, but Josh Allen had 3 rushes inside the 5 and a touchdown. TJ Yeldon had another, so the touchdown concerns are still there. I would view him the same way we did last year if Moss misses more time. I think he's like a mid-ish 6,000s type running back who will have a good floor from yardage, but needs to get lucky on touchdowns to show his ceiling. So pretty much status quo for me on Singletary from where he was down the stretch last year. The Rams fell down 28-3, but they were able to take the lead here, which is a pretty solid effort. Jared Goff finished with 0.23 passing net expected points per dropback in a road game against a tough defense where they were in a super negative script. I feel really good about this offense. They're more run-heavy than you would like, but that's the only downside right now. I think that they're playing really well. With Cam Akers being out, Darrell Henderson carried a big load for the Rams. He played just 49% of the snaps, but when he was out there, he was getting the ball. 20 carries and 3 targets. He had all 3 running back carries inside the 5-yard line. Goff did steal a touchdown because Goff is the most athletic quarterback on the planet, obviously. If we assume that both Cam Akers and Zach Moss miss more time, I think I'd rather have Henderson than Singletary based on the usage they've had. I'm going to ask you about that too, because I think that could be, you could push back on that, but that's where I'm at right now. This is a good day for Cooper Kupp. He had 10 targets. He had 11 the first 2 games combined. Robert Woods was dealing with more Tre'Davious White, so that makes sense, but across 3 total games, Kupp leads with 25% of the overall targets. Woods is at 22% of the targets, but he does have 36% of the deep targets. The problem is that Goff isn't throwing deep all that often because they haven't been throwing that much, just because they've been more run heavy. But I prefer Woods here. I have no real objection to either guy. I would probably object to Tyler Higbee. He got banged up, but did stay in the game, played 72% of the snaps. He ran 16 routes this week, ran 19 last week when he scored the 3 touchdowns. Gerald Everett ran 12 routes. Higbee does have upside, which is what we saw last week, but the weekly floor is going to be pretty gross, and you're kind of hoping for a touchdown there for sure. So it's Woods 1A, Kupp 1B, and then a pretty big fall off, I would say, to Tyler Higbee. Brandon, I said I want Henderson over Singletary if both Moss and Akers miss more time. Do you agree with that, or would you go the same way?
Yeah, I'd put Henderson first, mostly for the goal line work, but mostly I do like Darrell Henderson a lot. I will still kind of lean toward the Rams offense just because you never know what Josh Allen's going to give us. And I think a huge differentiation piece is I know Jared Goff scored, but you would expect Josh Allen to steal rushing work, even if Singletary is out there inside the 10. So I'm going to go with Henderson. And it's really hard not to be blinded by their matchup next week in that because, I mean, they face the Giants and they're favored by 12.5.
At home?
Yes.
Because I didn't have time to look at the week 4 stuff beforehand, so this is all news to me.
Well, I'm here. I got you.
I really hope
48.5 point total.
The Rams rib injuries hurt, man. You don't want to play through that. You should rest up, bud. Come back in week 5. We can party then. But for now, just let's rest up. We saw what happened with Rod Taylor. Ribs are bad. Rest them up. Come back healthy, and let Darryl eat. Let's move on to Chicago at Atlanta. Nick Foles got some magic, baby. He leads a comeback here. I'm going to choose to focus on the positive here and not talk about the team that gave up that lead because I feel like Falcons fans have been through enough. But talk to me about this game here, Brandon.
Yeah, usually whenever a quarterback comes in, in the third quarter, you don't get a whole lot of pass attempts, but Nick Foles at 29. So we kind of have a decent sample there. It's more than some quarterbacks throwing a full game, but I know it's comeback mode. But
it's more like Kirk Cousins this year.
Yeah, it probably is, honestly. He had just 6.5 yards per attempt, but did throw for 3 touchdowns. Good passing net expected points per dropback mark of 0.29. Threw downfield on 31% of his passes. Trubisky on the season is at 0.04 passing net expected points, which is below average. Foles almost 3 times the league average. So it's a sample. I know it's matchups and everything, but Foles, I would really prefer to be their quarterback moving forward. He threw 7 times to Jimmy Graham, 6 times to Allen Robinson, 3 to David Montgomery, Darnell Mooney, and Tariq Cohen, who is believed to have torn his ACL on a very unfortunate fair catch, which I like Tariq Cohen a lot. I don't talk about it because he's not super DFS viable, but I really like watching him play, so that one's super disappointing. So hopefully that's not what actually the injury is, but overall, in this game, Allen Robinson had 13 targets for 123 yards. Jimmy Graham had 10 for 60 and 2 touchdowns. And now on the season, Allen Robinson is up to a 27% target share with 30% of the team's air yards. He's averaging 3.3 downfield targets per game with a red zone target as well. I know market shares matter, but I do like to look at just raw totals for those numbers because I like to see who's actually getting a lot of downfield work, even without adjusting for play volume. Again, I would feel way better about Robinson with Nick Foles going, and we both liked Allen Robinson a lot this week for the volume. And I think Jimmy Graham just can't be ignored totally. It's a 16% target share, which is passable for a tight end, but 2.3 red zone targets per game, and they really don't have anywhere else to go. Anthony Miller, really volatile right now. He's getting 2.7 downfield targets per game, getting some red zone work as well, but he has multiple downfield targets, which are passes that travel at least 16 yards downfield. So he's got multiple of those in every game so far, but played around 40% of the snaps the first 2 weeks, played 57% this week. I love Anthony Miller, but not really interested in his workload right now. David Montgomery had 14 carries and 3 targets. There could be targets to be had if Cohen is out for the season. Montgomery played 56% of the snaps, which was up a bit from 45% and 54% the first 2 weeks. Cohen was at 32% of the snaps before leaving. I would kind of expect Cordero Patterson to sort of slot in a little bit there, but I don't ever love David Montgomery in DFS, and I don't expect him to become heavily involved in the passing game. They host the Colts in week 4 with a 44-point total. Obviously, we don't really know what to expect there, but probably not going to be super in on that game. I'm not sure if the Falcons are unlucky or I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, they did play this game without Julio Jones. Russell Gage left early with a concussion, so I definitely don't want to overreact too much to these 38 pass attempts in terms of target shares. But one thing I can feel good about is where they went at the top, because 13 of them went to Calvin Ridley, who has been their wide receiver 1 pretty much with or without Julio so far. He's up to a 27% target share with 43% of the team's air yards. He's getting almost 5 downfield targets per game, 2.3 red zone targets per game. I know they're throwing a lot, but that's kind of what you expect here, and he's very, very good. So he might be borderline the wide receiver 1 in DFS with that workload, especially with half of his games being played in domes. But in the event that Julio and Gage were to miss next week, it would be relevant because they're on the Monday Night Football slate, and single game is really fun. Hayden Hurst had just 3 targets, so I don't really love his workload. Olamide Zacchaeus had 6 targets. Could have had a touchdown if Matt Ryan hit him on a bomb. But Zacchaeus played 79% of the snaps compared to Ridley's 93%. And then Brandon Powell was third among receivers with 54%. So it's getting a little messy here. Ridley is the guy. Todd Gurley's not really the guy for me. 14 carries. Brian Hill had 9. Gurley just 2 targets. And Gurley played 51% of the snaps. And even with Atlanta scoring points, I just don't really see interest in playing Todd Gurley outside of a single game slate. His snap rates have been 46%, 64%, and 51%. If they were on the main slate, like that hypothetical, without Gage and Julio, I think I'd still really only be interested in Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, for main slate, yes, I agree. I think the only difference we might have here for this game is I might be a little bit higher on David Montgomery than you are. I think what you're saying is very fair about him potentially being scripted out and like it's not a great offense, but maybe the offense gets a tick better with Nick Foles. He's looked like pretty good this year. He's gotten 3 targets in each game, and they were in a negative script yesterday, but he set a season high for snap rates. So like he's not going to get all of Tariq Cohen's targets, but if he can get 2 targets per game, that puts him up to 5. 5 targets with his 15 or so rush attempts can work if the offense is working. So I think I might be a little bit higher on Montgomery than you are.
So Bears?
Sorry.
What?
I looked at his salary, if that's what you're going to ask.
Well, what was your first instinct of what his salary would be?
63.
And did you like that?
He's 58.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that like he's not. I don't think he profiles as someone who could be a play for cash games. So I'd agree with like you there because like, again, like you're right. He could get scripted out, but I think for tournaments, there is some interest there because like we talk about, you need a path to a 20-point game. He's got a 20-point game already this year. And if he gets additional targets, that path becomes a lot clearer. So I would say he could be someone I have exposure to in tournaments, but like, I think that like I would need to see it before going harder than that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very good example of how easy DFS can be when you're playing like cash games with so many question marks still with David Montgomery and so many other good running backs to pick from.
Yeah,
he's just not. He's a tournament only sort of play, and that's it.
Yeah. It really narrows down your list a lot to think about it from that perspective. So I think Montgomery is very interesting. Well, hopefully Tariq Cohen's okay, and this is all moot.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like that'll be the case, but hopefully that is because, I mean, he just got paid. So that's awesome timing, like to get paid first, and hopefully he gets to play regardless. Monday Night Football is always one of the highlights of the NFL season, but it gets even better when the game features the last 2 MVP-winning quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes and the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs take on Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, and FanDuel is doing its part to add to the excitement. If the Chiefs and the Ravens score a total of 75 or more points, FanDuel will refund all entry fees. Yes, all entry fees on the $2 million Monday Million contest tonight. That is right. You can enter the contest for just $9, compete for your share of the $2 million prize pool, and have your entry fee refunded back to your account if the teams put on an offensive show. They could be giving out $2 million. I would want a piece of that personally. The contest is filling fast. Head to FanDuel and submit your entries now. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move on to Tennessee at Minnesota. And Brandon, we're dumb. We talked down this game the entire podcast on Thursday and went for 61 points because, of course. And finally, Derrick Henry was a big part of that. He had 26 carries and 3 targets. This was the first game with Darrington Evans active, so it was good to see Henry still get the 3 targets. I would note that Evans missed a lot of camp, so there is the potential for Evans to get more work as the season goes along. But for now, that's encouraging. Henry has had at least 29 adjusted opportunities in each game so far. It's not going to work if he doesn't score touchdowns, as we saw last week, but the upside is very much there when he does, and the odds he scores touchdowns tend to be pretty high. One thing to note here is the left tackle Taylor Lewan did leave with a shoulder injury. He did not return. If he misses time, that'd be a pretty big downgrade for the offense that is already using Dennis Kelly at right tackle. They lost Jack Conklin in the offseason. Isaiah Wilson, their first-round pick, had COVID and then was doing donuts drunk in a parking lot. So, it's a rough situation for the tackles if Lewan does miss his time. Ryan Tannehill did not do a ton, but he did throw 37 times. They are at 43, 24, and 37 pass attempts so far in 3 games. That is with A.J. Brown being out. So they're still not an air raid offense by any means, but it's possible they'll be less annoying than last year as the year goes along. They may pass a little bit more. We'll keep an eye on that, but, I would still downgrade Tannehill if Lewan can't go. I'm trying to find that. In the 2 games without Brown, Jonnu Smith has gotten pretty good volume. He is at 23% of the team's targets. That's tied with Adam Humphries for the team lead. Corey Davis is at 19%. Humphries also leads with 3 deep targets because, of course. Jonnu has 2. Davis has none for the whole season. Jonnu leads the team with 3 red zone targets. So I would feel better projecting volume going forward for Jonnu than Humphries. Davis, I feel like he's going to get you 5, 50, and maybe a touchdown every week. And, that's fine. It's not going to win you tournaments. The checklist for tournaments, a wide receiver is, can you get me 2 touchdowns or 85 receiving yards? I don't know if Corey Davis necessarily can. Now, they get Pittsburgh next week. That could be kind of a fun game. Maybe you want to go there, but I need to see a little bit more before I get super enthused. He did have 100 yards in week 1, so he can do it, but I'm just not super interested personally. Justin Jefferson, though, is interesting. He broke out a huge way here. He had 9 of 25 targets of the Vikings for 175 yards and a touchdown. He had 2 deep targets. Adam Thielen had the 2 others. So if Jefferson sticks, which I'd expect he would, he's a first-round pick, another guy who was on the COVID list to open the training camp, so makes sense he'd have kind of a slow start. This could go back to being an offense similar to last year where we'd see all of Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, and Justin Jefferson get good market shares, but it'd be tough for more than one of them to go off in a game due to muted passing volume. So I am in on Jefferson for sure, but his salary needs to remain in check, and there is still bust potential if he winds up being popular. Dalvin Cook snapped back into a workhorse role here. He had 22 carries and 5 targets. So basically, they just needed to run more plays for Cook's role to be apparent. He's a pretty solid option, obviously. We just need to be sure the Vikings will run enough plays and score enough points for it to matter. So the floor is still a bit muted, and so that's kind of like Derrick Henry, where the floor is just kind of, it's okay, it's not great, but the ceiling is very much there. So, I think that the Vikings kind of back to what they were last year. Brandon, what about you? How do you feel about Justin Jefferson and the way that he changes this offense to the Vikings?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good comp overall. I would just say, based on a lot of my research, don't chase one game from someone. It's more about that extended usage and snap share and being out on the field. So I don't want to overreact and say you have to play Justin Jefferson no matter if he's at a low salary next week. It's more if he's involved, that gives me somebody other than Adam Thielen I can go to in his passing offense. So I'm with you where I think I'm higher on this offense than I was entering the week, but I also don't want to overreact to Jefferson for week 4.
The Vikings are on the road against Houston next week. Jefferson is $5,400. I think that's low enough to stay in play, but if people are point chasing, that could be not super advantageous. Let's move on to Washington at Cleveland, Brandon. And Baker Mayfield didn't look good at times, but like there was still productivity in like his per drop back numbers. The problem is they didn't drop back that much. So what'd you see in this game?
Yeah, we talked about this one on Thursday due to pace, and it did put up 54 total points. Just didn't really feel that way. The Browns put up their 34 mainly through the rushing game. They had 37 rushes, 23 passes. Nick Chubb handled 19 carries for 108 yards and 2 touchdowns, had just 1 target. That's 21 adjusted opportunities, which is not great. Kareem Hunt, by contrast, 16 rushes, 3 targets. That's 22 adjusted opportunities, which, again, obviously not that great. It's clear that the Browns would prefer that this backfield is just split evenly. In weeks 1 and 2, it was about a 50-50 split. Week 3, it was 54% of the snaps for Chubb, 46% for Hunt. So, I mean, I don't really want that. I don't care what they're doing with their work because Chubb can get scripted out a bit. If they're trailing, Kareem Hunt is never going to get all of the red zone work, and you just don't really have to play that guessing game. Especially, and this would be different if the offense was just kind of better overall. But Baker has been, okay, a little puzzling at times. So it's just hard for me to really want to invest in that backfield. Also really hard to invest in this passing game. The targets obviously sparse because of the overall volume. They did favor Odell Beckham, who had 6. Jarvis Landry and Austin Hooper each had 4. Baker threw downfield just twice, but is around the NFL average in downfield rate and ADOT, which is average target depth. So, in terms of efficiency, just kind of average. So it's really hard to love this offense. I couldn't be less, lukewarm on them, I guess. Odell has 26% of the targets. Jarvis Landry's at 15%. Kareem Hunt, 13%. Austin Hooper, 12%. It's kind of just Odell in the passing game. The team wants to run the ball a lot. They've passed at a 48% clip in one-score games. It's just not good. The silver lining is that they are at Dallas next week. They may not be able to run the ball in that one. The total, 56 points. Cleveland somehow a 4.5-point underdog, which seems a little thin, but maybe that game is going to be one we really have to talk about on Thursday. For Washington, I think their passing offense is a problem. And not in a fun, this is a problem for everyone.
Russell Wilson is a problem.
Yeah.
Dwayne Haskins, also a problem.
He's lost expected points in 2 straight games. In week 1, he was at positive 0.4 total, which is not good. Been sacked on 9% of his dropbacks. He is at least giving volume to Terry McLaurin, who had 8 targets in week 3. Logan Thomas had 7, but the touchdowns went to Dontrell Inman. Isaiah Wright also had 6 targets. On the full season, McLaurin is at 25% target share. Logan Thomas is at 24%. I mean, you just mentioned Russell Wilson, so they're kind of like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, where they're getting half the targets. But it's just a little bit different. So I can't chase anything outside of those 2 guys when I'm looking for bring-back stacks. And that continues into the backfield. Antonio Gibson, just 9 carries, 3 targets, despite 62 plays from Washington. He played 65% of the snaps last week, but 40% in week 3. J.D. McKissick played 52%. Gibson, just 7 total targets. It's just not enough to chase. And Chase Young hurt his groin, which is not great because the strength of Washington is their defensive front, and they host Baltimore next week. So
good luck.
Yeah.
I want to go back to Cleveland. We're talking about that Dallas game. Would you include Nick Chubb as a bring-back option? I think we can agree that Odell would be, right?
Odell is, for sure.
And would you include Nick Chubb? Because I would personally, because I think the way that I view game stacks is that I'm assuming both sides go off. I mean, if the Browns go off, the odds of Nick Chubb as a part of that are decently high. So although Chubb is not going to be a standalone play for me, I think that he works in bring back options within that game. Where do you sit with regards to that?
Typically, I wouldn't, but because again, they're more run heavy in one score games than they are pass heavy, which is pretty rare. So I'm with you. If that game is going to be what it is, if it's going to be close enough for the Dallas guys to pay off their salaries, it's going to go through Odell, Nick Chubb, and Kareem Hunt. Really, Austin Hooper's kind of. I'll use him in game stacks, but it's just more out of obligation. Same with kind of Jarvis Landry right now.
Yeah, it's going to be. I can guarantee you, Odell Beckham has 10 targets for 31 yards next week. Like, we can just lock that in now.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, just mentally prepare yourself for that because it's going to happen. I can guarantee it. Let's move now to Las Vegas. Still sounds weird. At New England. I also won the under on this game. It was my bet for covering the spread. I'm an idiot, so just don't listen to me. The Patriots were without David Andrews, their center, and it did show at times because Cam finished with negative 2.82 passing net expected points. It might be worthwhile to downgrade expectations of efficiency in this offense while Andrews is out. He's on IR, so he'll miss at least 2 more games. They also had Marcus Cannon opt out. So, like, the offensive line, not what it used to be. It's a pretty big concern for me with the way they want to run this offense. Didn't seem to bother Rex Burkhead, though. 3 total touchdowns, 2 of them flying through the air. He did that on 6 carries and 10 targets. James White should be back soon, so I would not chase that. But it's good to know that Burkhead will get a lot of passing game work if White misses time again in the future. I just would not chase it. Sonny Michel had 117 yards rushing and 23 receiving, but it was on 9 carries and 2 targets in a game that they won. So I wouldn't chase that either. Because of Burkhead, none of the pass catchers did much. Julian Edelman was the only non-Burkhead guy to get more than 4 targets. He had 6 for 23 yards. They are not terrible when they have to throw because Edelman has 27% of the targets. N'Keal Harry has 24%, but Harry has literally 0 downfield targets this year. I guess that's the way they're creating separation for him, is just throwing in bubble screens. Edelman has 80% of their deep targets, which is like 5 probably. I don't know. I haven't checked, but I guess I wouldn't. Maybe 4 out of 5. I don't know. It's not a lot. So Edelman could be great. I think it actually is 5. Edelman could be great. Harry would be usable if they have to throw. You just have to ensure they're going to chuck it first, and that's kind of not what they want to do. The Raiders had to play without Henry Ruggs, and then Bryan Edwards got banged up during the game. He did come back in. They were fine overall. I wouldn't change anything too much based on this one game. Like, I kind of expected them to stink, and they were okay. So that was better than expected. Josh Jacobs was dealing with a hip injury coming in. Still had 16 carries and 4 targets and played 59% of the snaps in a pretty negative script. I would count this as a minor positive for his stock because, like, we did see him play like half the snaps last year in games like this. So I'm inclined to get in on Jacobs if people are wary after this one down game. With Ruggs out, Hunter Renfrow led the team with 9 targets. It seemed like the Patriots were keying in on Darren Waller. He had just 4 targets. I would keep the status quo here and hope Ruggs is back next week. The only change here is a slight upgrade to Josh Jacobs. So pretty much keeping things neutral when it comes to the Raiders. Now, I mentioned the Patriots more in play when they have to pass. Next week, they face Kansas City in one of the afternoon games. Ooh. 7-point dogs. So, Brandon, it's been shaky for this passing offense at times. We saw that when they had to open it up against Seattle, they were able to do so. So how confident can we be in Edelman specifically, and maybe Harry, heading into that Chiefs game?
So, in a nice, I played Julian Edelman and Cam Newton in a single entry because of Julian Edelman's workload overall, just his dominant target share, and he's actually getting. I have him at over 50% of the team's air yards because, as you mentioned, N'Keal Harry just not getting downfield work. So for me, I do think that Edelman is in play whenever they have to pass. I think N'Keal Harry is also in play. And if James White were to miss, I would definitely include Rex Burkhead in the bringbacks. But
yeah,
I do think this changed my tune a lot where I kind of need them to be underdogs or assume that they are in super neutral or slightly negative script to get anything from Cam Newton. I'm not going to chase Cam Newton's rushing because there are quarterbacks who rush the ball and throw the ball, and that's really not what Cam Newton is doing as a priority.
So if we can get a script similar to what we had against Seattle, great. And that might be what we have next week. So I think the Patriots fit there, but there are broader concerns. I agree with you. Broader concerns when they're favorites. Let's move now to San Francisco at New York, the Giants specifically this time. And the 49ers are missing like 92 dudes, and the Giants still did nothing. But Jerick McKinnon looked pretty solid. What'd you see here, Brandon?
Yeah, it's tough to get a full read here because there's no Jimmy Garoppolo, no Raheem Mostert, no Tevin Coleman, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle. But Nick Mullins was very good. 0.60 passing net expected points per dropback, which is like 6 times the league average. Had 4 rush attempts. I'm not going to buy into it much. I'm not going to play Nick Mullins just based on how salary goes for quarterbacks on FanDuel. But I mean, it's enough to keep this offense afloat and go to Jerick McKinnon, who I'll get to in just a second. But the lead target getter from Mullins was first-round rookie Brandon Ayuk, who had 8 targets and also 3 rushes for 101 total yards and a touchdown. Wide receiver rushes are something I don't really put too much stock into, but I definitely should because that clearly means that they want to get these players the ball. It's almost like the inverse of running backs. You want running backs who get targets. You probably should definitely be into wide receivers who can get carries and those easy touches because he did rush for a touchdown. So I think that's interesting. Ayuk overall, 4.9 yard average target depth for what that's worth on the season, but did have a ton of yards after the catch at Arizona State. That was kind of his thing. Get him the ball in space, bubble screens, things like that. He played 72% of the snaps in week 2, 73% in week 3. So I kind of like him to stick around. He has an 18% target share in his healthy games, which is second behind only Jordan Reed's 22%. Reed, I don't know what's going to happen with him. He got hurt twice in this game, did have 6 targets for just 23 yards. Kendrick Bourne also had 6 targets, and Bourne led the team with an 83% snap rate. Don't really want to chase anybody other than Ayuk. And again, I'm not really going to chase him unless it's a spot where I think they're going to have to throw the ball a good bit. In the backfield, Jerick McKinnon, our boy, led with 14 carries and 4 targets. Jeff Wilson had 12 carries and 3 targets. In the red zone, Wilson had 5 carries. McKinnon had 3, which is a big concern. But in the first half, McKinnon had 9 carries and 3 targets. Wilson had just 5 carries, so that's really promising for me. Also promising is that McKinnon played 62% of the snaps. Wilson was at 30%. So I think McKinnon is the clear preference with the current backfield injuries, which is important for the single game slate on Sunday Night Football against the Eagles. For the Giants, this should be kind of a quick one. I hope you did not blow too much of your budget on the backfield and season long. Hopefully you didn't load up on them overall. Daniel Jones led this team with 49 yards on his 5 carries. Devontae Freeman, 5 carries for 10 yards. Wayne Gallman, 4 for 7. Dion Lewis, 1 for 0. Gallman and Lewis each had 3 targets, combined for 17 yards there. No targets for Freeman. The snap rate, 38% for Lewis, 35% for Gallman, 29% for Devonta Freeman. So no thank you there.
Free Wayne Gallman.
Yeah, but as it is now, there's nothing we can do with that.
Nope.
No Sterling Shepard here, so keep that in mind. 7 targets each for Golden Tate and Darius Slayton, 5 for Evan Ingram. Slayton leads this team with a 20% target share, 2 downfield targets per game, 1.3 red zone targets per game as well. Evan Ingram runs a lot of routes, has an 18% target share. Tate is at 17%, but Daniel Jones really one of the worst quarterbacks in the league so far. The volume is not relevant in DFS if they are just empty targets. Slayton does have good usage. He's the only Giant I care about right now. And I think that's especially important, again, in that game against the Rams where they are 12.5-point underdogs. I think Slayton would be an interesting bring back with the downfield work.
Name that salary, Rams defense in week 4 against Daniel Jones, who adores nothing more than giving up sacks.
Probably Probably about 7,100.
I was going to say 75. Okay, so we're on the same page here. I'm very weird that we both went for 7,000, but all right. Let's move to Cincinnati at Philadelphia. The Eagles' injuries here continue to mount, which is unfortunate because they weren't playing well when they were healthy. They're already without Jalen Reagor and a bunch of offensive linemen. And then today, neither Dallas Goedert, or Sunday, I should say, neither Dallas Goedert nor Deshaun Jackson were able to return after injuries. It's a hamstring for Jackson. Goddard has an ankle sprain that will likely force him to miss time. That's not the only reason Carson Wentz struggled. He lost 6.65 passing net expected points and has been – we just talked about Daniel Jones being the worst quarterback through 3 weeks. He has competition, but it's tough to expect that to get better with so many people out. This offense is going to be rough for a bit, and that does hurt Miles Sanders a lot because his volume was awesome. He had 18 carries and 8 targets. If you had told me Thursday – that Miles Sanders would get 18 carries and 8 targets, I would have said 100% exposure. Let's go. It didn't go well. His 8 targets resulted in 12 yards. He did not score, so it was a letdown for fantasy. His floor is going to be really good due to volume. He still has a ceiling because he's a good player. But we generally want to tie ourselves to good offenses, and this is not that right now. It stinks because I love Miles Sanders and I will go back here, but it's a legitimate downgrade that this offense is as bad as it is right now. We need them to get healthy. Because of the injuries, Greg Ward and Zach Ertz dominated targets. What a fun offense. They had 11 and 10 respectively. The 11 targets for Ward were just 60 air yards. It's similar to what he saw last year. Make it a lot of looks, but it'll be pretty low leverage output, kind of like a Danny Amendola type guy. Ertz is a different story. He had 111 air yards with 2 deep targets and 1 in the red zone. He'll be similar to Sanders, where he has a volume-based floor. That's more valuable at tight end than running back because not many tight ends have access to a ceiling, so I can value floor there more. So Ertz and Sanders will be in play here despite the offense's struggles, but they do get downgrades as a result. Joe Burrow continued to throw the ball a ton despite getting absolutely rocked. He threw 44 passes. He is averaging 47 a game in his 3 starts. He hasn't been all that efficient. This was his best game at 0.11, passing net expected points per dropback, but you can do a lot on tons of volume, and he will run every now and then too. So this offense is, it's kind of fun, despite the fact they're not great. They're fun. We also saw things get shaken up a bit with the pass catchers. Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins handled the majority of the volume. A.J. Green is being shadowed by Darius Slay. So he had just 6 targets, while Higgins had 9 and Boyd had 13. 5 of Higgins' targets were deep, and that was kind of his specialty at Clemson, was like just fighting for balls downfield. Higgins has established himself as the team's number 3 receiver, pour one out for John Ross. Whether Higgins can consistently out-target Green is a different question because Green, he did struggle early on. He didn't get a lot of volume in week 3, but again, he was facing Darius Slay. So I don't know how to view A.J. Green. I wasn't really in on him despite the volume just because I was worried about that volume sticking. I would not go so far as to consider Higgins the number 2 yet. I think it's Boyd number 1, Green number 2 with kind of shaky ground there. Higgins at least in play for me right now. Drew Sample ran 34 routes in his first full game as the full-time fill-in for C.J. Uzomah. It resulted in just 1 target, though, so I am okay not chasing here unless I'm game stacking. With the neutral script, Joe Mixon's role expanded. He played a season-high 72% of the snaps. He had been under 60% each of the first 2 weeks. He had 17 carries and 3 targets. I might give him a slight bump up, but this is still pretty much the same role he has always had with the team. If you have 47 pass attempts and get 3 targets, you're still kind of just a rush-only back, so that's a little bit annoying for me. But Brandon, I do want to ask you about the passing game here for Cincinnati because they face Jacksonville next week. I think that could be a situation where, like you said, it's kind of a messy-ish game. So we could go with the pass catchers here. Have you seen enough out of Higgins where you're going at him, trying to get in on A.J. Green after a down game? What are you seeing here?
It's tough. This is going to be one of those games where by Sunday I will have various game stacks because I think I'm going to be super clever. But sitting here Monday morning, I don't need to. The total is 44.5. The Bengals, 3-point favorites. They should be able to ride Joe Mixon pretty well. But I mean, Joe Burrow overall, despite getting sacked on 9% of his dropbacks, is at league average in terms of passing net expected points per dropback. almost just a little bit below. But we know how much sacks hurt your per drop back efficiency. Even with all that, he's been pretty solid. So I haven't seen enough to divest and just be completely off of this passing offense. The problem is there's not really one guy. There are three guys who may be the guy at certain points. I'm not putting T. Higgins really in that conversation yet, but I don't think that he's irrelevant. So hitting on the right stack there, I think, is still going to be difficult. And there won't be enough points for all of them to sort of cash in.
I do think Boyd is kind of like sneaking into being the guy. I think that this is relevant to what you're talking about with Allen Robinson, where like you kind of want to look at the overall targets rather than the market shares because they throw so much here rather than so little. But Boyd does have 26 total targets so far this year. That's more than 8 per game. He's got 4 deep targets. All of them came on Sunday, but that's not terrible.
What salary are you thinking here? Because Boyd's the kind of prototypical, has somewhat of a floor wide receiver for a cash game.
65.
Okay, you're 500 over. So,
oh really?
Yeah. I mean,
what would you have said?
Probably like 59.
Okay,
just because of the offense.
Okay. I mean, I think I actually give him a bump up because of the offense, personally.
But I mean,
like Burrow's always going to take sacks. Like he did that at LSU because like he has some Russell Wilson in him. Like that was my comp for him coming out was Russell Wilson. Like he wants to make plays and he's going to take sacks as a result of that. So I think that's going to stick. But if they're throwing 47 times a game, I can take that personally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not out. It's just usually the mid sixes are more to me like the lower volume guys in good offenses.
Okay.
Or guys with super high volume and not good offenses. And I don't think the volume is super high for Boyd just yet.
Fair enough. Let's move now to Houston at Pittsburgh. I had like mini stacks this game. I never went with I didn't use any of the quarterbacks here, but I did have some mini stacks. James Conner was in those. Deontay Johnson was also in those. That did not go as well. Will Fuller kind of came back to life. What did you see with this one overall?
Yeah, these are two really difficult teams to figure out because they don't jump off the page, but they're also not irrelevant by any means for DFS. 49 total points. Unfortunately, as you alluded to, Deontay Johnson left early with a concussion. Pittsburgh had a balanced attack with 38 rushing attempts and 36 pass attempts. James Conner was the linchpin there in the backfield. 18 carries for 109 yards and a touchdown. 5 targets as well. Conner played 77% of the snaps in week 2. That did fall in week 3 to 66%. He is at 24 adjusted opportunities per game. It's not elite, but it is viable for sure. I should probably check what his numbers are for just the past 2 weeks. Did lose some red zone work to Jalen Samuels and Benny Snell. Not much, but it was something, and I'm definitely not going to go all in on James Conner. Eric Ebron, James Washington led the way with 7 targets. Juju Smith-Schuster, James Conner had 5 apiece as well. Even with the limited workload in week 3, Deontay Johnson leads the team with a 23% target share, followed by Juju Smith-Schuster at 17%, James Washington at 14%. Chase Claypool did lead the team in snaps at 76%. Eric Ebron was at 75%, Juju 72%, James Washington 61%. This is tough. If Deontay Johnson's healthy, he has a really good role. Juju, not quite so much. 6, 8, and 5 targets with a 5.3 yard average target depth. He is pretty dynamic, but I wouldn't really want to play that if it wasn't attached to like Juju's name. Juju's really fun.
He kind of has like the Deontay Johnson role of last year where he can like do some stuff, but like he doesn't get a lot of downfield work. And like that's why I didn't use Deontay a lot last year.
Yeah.
Outside of the fact that he was tied to Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges. But like it's not a great role.
Yeah, it's not. It's more it's
Do you expect him to positively regress? Or is it I don't know, whatever. Do you expect him to stay where he's been at? Do you expect him to get to the 2018 levels? I think that's kind of the question. But like, I think if I had to choose, I would drift more towards the 2020 work so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to through 3 games. You have to kind of trust that this is something. And
I would
I could
also
be way
say
wrong on that.
you should give yourself more credit. You had already lopped off week 1 for James Conner.
I thought I might have.
Yeah, you did. So you're good. 24 adjusted opportunities per game for the past 2 weeks. It's fine. Not great. Yeah. It's fine. He was an appropriate salary on Sunday.
Yes. They're at the Titans next week. 1.5 point spread, 47.5 point total. Kind of has the makings for another game stack. So that's probably one we'll have to dig into a little bit closer on Thursday. For the Texans, Deshaun Watson's had a rough go of things. 12% sack rate, but still 0.10 passing net expected points per drop back. Kind of like Joe Burrow in that sense where he's still doing some stuff despite getting sacked a ton. Watson threw 27 times. Nobody had more than 5 targets. Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks both had 5. Randall Cobb led with 95 yards in his 4 targets, and our boy Kenny Stills, I should say, for those not in the know, also got 4 targets. This is kind of another dispersed target share situation. Fuller had no targets last week. Is it a 16% share so far? Cooks is at 19%. Anytime I see below 20% target shares for like the number one, I do get worried. That said, similar to Juju, I love Deshaun, so I'm going to value him in much better spots. I will go at Cooks and Fuller in the right spots, and that's despite the fact that they didn't really get peppered, and they kind of haven't so far, which is also the case for David Johnson, who has a pretty phenomenal role. Just hasn't been getting the ball a lot. 13 carries, 3 targets this week with Duke Johnson out again. 96% snap rate after an 81% snap rate and 95% the first 2 weeks. He's like must be capped or something. He's at 11, 11, and 13 carries, then 4, 4, and 3 targets in those. So like it's kind of the same workload despite a ton of snaps, or at least a really high snap rate. They host the Vikings next week though. 52-point total at the open. So that'll be a fun one.
I would assume that people are like going to be in Will Fuller there, given that he actually showed life.
Yeah.
Kind of think David Johnson might be a fun way to, I am always pro Will Fuller. But like if you want to deviate from Fuller, David Johnson might be a fun way to like get off of that chalk. So Brandon, name me that salary for David Johnson at home against Minnesota.
Okay. So it's hard because the snap rate's there, but the workload isn't. Injecting the snap rate into a good game, I would have to see David Johnson at like 74 before I got wary, but I don't think he'll be there, and I think we'll probably be closer to 7,000 still.
My number was 68, and David Johnson for week number 4, if it loads, it went to the bottom. Let's scroll up here. He is 67, so I think that when you are looking for ways to potentially pivot off of Will Fuller, again, you don't have to. Will Fuller is awesome, but I think that David Johnson's a pretty viable way to do so.
Yes.
So I think that the role, especially because like they're not going to be getting pasted in that game, I wouldn't expect, which they have for a lot of this year. So things get a lot better for them really quickly. Let's move on to the Jets at the Colts, because we have to. The Jets offense sucked here, and it dragged down both teams, which is something that does happen. Sam Darnold threw 2 pick sixes. That takes away possession from the Colts offense. And as a result, Jonathan Taylor played just 40% of the snaps. He had 13 carries and 1 target. When looking at perfect lineups from last year, it was evident that we wanted running backs in tight game scripts because they got volume throughout. Like there weren't a lot of backs on teams that were heavily favored like Taylor was. I still used Taylor on Sunday, so I overlooked this too. And like, I think that the floor was obviously there. I should have been more skeptical of the ceiling though, just because like last year, okay, so 62% of perfect running backs last year came from games with a spread of less than 5 points. That's compared to 50% of overall games. It's a pretty big split. So I think I need to do a better job of valuing tight games and not getting in on running backs who are heavily favored, because stuff like this can happen, especially when Jameis Darnold is quarterbacking the other team. The game script here made it hard to tell what T.Y. Hilton would have done in a normal setting. He did go for 52 yards on just 3 targets. Probably his best efficiency of the season. I'm still pretty off of him, but I'm keeping an eye on him, kind of seeing where things snake out here. Even with Jack Doyle back, Mo Alley Cox played 60% of the snaps. All 3 of his targets came while Phillip Rivers was in, which is a good sign, but he ran his 8 routes compared to 16 for Doyle. We will go at Alley Cox again when that number goes back up. And I think he could still wrestle things away from Jack Doyle, but it was discouraging to see him not do that after what he did last week. So I won't be using Alley Cox for now. And if I miss out on a big game, I'm okay with that just because the role is not that appealing. The Jets were a disaster. The offensive line was banged up, and then they lost their one good player on offense, Mekhi Becton, got hurt in game. So that's in addition to the pregame injuries to all their receivers. So Sam Darnold has been awful. It is I joke about him being erratic and kind of not good, but
he's last. He's last in passing the expected points per drop back.
Yeah, it's I value situation a lot though, and it's hard to tell a situation here. So
I'm just saying.
You're right. Hopefully at some point they get Perriman, Crowder, Mims back. I don't think Perriman and Crowder aren't on IR, but Mims is. I think Mims can come back in week 5 or something, but it's not good. No one on the Jets is DFS viable right now. Chris Herndon pretty much did what we joked about for a stat line, 5 targets, 21 yards.
Yeah.
So not a single Jet is DFS viable right now, and their bad play is hurting their opponents too. It's just bad across the board. So let's move now to Carolina at the Chargers, Brandon. This one was interesting. Austin Eckler kind of sprang back to life. Justin Herbert seems to like Austin Eckler quite a bit. So what'd you see here?
Yeah, almost was an elite game-winning hook and ladder touchdown, but didn't quite happen, unfortunately. Just would have been awesome, and Eckler would have scored again, or scored on it, I should say. The Panthers won it, so I'm going to start there. We saw Mike Davis retain a Christian McCaffrey light workload with 13 carries and a team-high 9 targets for 91 total yards and a touchdown. He played 76% of the snaps. Behind him, not a whole lot. Reggie Bonifant had 2 carries. Curtis Samuel, I know there was a lot of talk that he might get some carries, which he did. He had 4. So he was involved a bit, but not enough to affect Davis too much. Samuel played just 65% of the snaps, which is actually down from 75% and 70% the first 2 games. So if you were in on Curtis Samuel as someone who benefited from this situation, I don't really think that happened in week 3. Teddy Bridgewater threw just 28 passes, so volume was low for everyone, especially with 9 of those going to Davis. Robbie Anderson led with 6 targets among the receivers. Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore each had 4. If we look just at the past 2 weeks to kind of somewhat adjust for the new offense with McCaffrey not 100%, Moore and Davis each have 17 targets. Robbie Anderson's at 16. Those are all at least 23% target shares, so that's really concentrated usage. DJ Moore had 2 downfield targets this week. He's averaged 3.3 per game through 3 weeks. He has not scored yet, but has a really strong overall workload. I would be looking to buy DJ Moore whenever possible. Robbie Anderson's also in a pretty good spot with at least 6 targets in each game, 4 total downfield looks. Mentioned trying to buy on DJ Moore. They host the Cardinals in week 4, so that's a game where I'll have a ton of interest. The total was 51.5 at open. So I think we'll probably talk about that one a good bit. The Chargers threw 49 times. They did lose tackle Brian Bulaga. They lost Mike Williams as well. So that kind of inflated the target totals for their pass catchers. Keenan Allen racked up 19 targets for 132 yards and a score. Austin Eckler caught all 11 of his targets for 84 yards. Hunter Henry had 7 targets. I talked probably multiple times at this point where it's kind of Keenan Allen, it's Hunter Henry, it was Mike Williams, it should be Austin Eckler. We kind of know where the ball's going whenever the team does throw. And Keenan Allen now has a 33% target share, 3 downfield targets per game, 1.7 red zone targets per game, which is just a really great overall workload. One of the best in football, honestly. And Hunter Henry is at a 21% target share, which is 6th best among tight ends. If there's no Mike Williams for a bit, they're going to be featured options for sure. But jumping back to Eckler, he had 12 rushes and 11 targets. That's 34 adjusted opportunities. By contrast, Joshua Kelly, 8 rushes, 2 targets for 12 adjusted opportunities. The three-week average now is 26.3 for Eckler, 17.7 for Kelly. Kelly is more involved in the red zone in terms of carries, but Eckler, some people overreacted in week 1. Some people didn't react a lot after week 1, but Eckler's now played 68, 57, and 72% of snaps through 3 weeks. I'm about to ask you about him, so just prepare. They play at the Buccaneers next week, which is not really a great spot for running backs. The Bucs are 7.5-point favorites. Total is 44.5. What are your thoughts on Austin Eckler at this point?
I don't know. Is that a cop-out?
No, because I think it's fair. I'm kind of dumbing everything down, but Austin Eckler is not a cash game play on FanDuel. So outside of that, he has to be someone that is either in play in like game stacks and tournaments or just unplayable. And I don't think he's unplayable.
Yeah, I don't think he's unplayable either. But like next week, like their implied total has to be pretty low. If it's a 44.5-point total and the Bucs are 7.5-point favorites, especially Bulaga misses time because like their left tackle is just like they could get wrecked. So if Herbert starts that game, he gets sacked a lot. That would be a concern. I would still be in on Allen and Henry, but like I think Eckler, based on his workload here, you said 26.3 adjusted opportunities per game in the 3 games. I would say that's like a $7,300 back, but the problem is he was higher than that last week, and he went off, so he's going to be more expensive than that, right?
You would think their implied team total would work out to be 18.5. By the way.
Math is hard.
So what was that salary you named for Eckler?
73.
That's what you'd pay?
Yeah.
He is 69.
Why? Is it because of the matchup?
Probably. Although the opponent rank on FanDuel says they're 28th against running backs, which is...
Well, they faced McCaffrey and Davis in week 2. That probably skewed things quite a bit. And Kamara.
I'm just saying people are going to see that.
I know. I want to actually ask you about Mike Davis because I was really encouraged with that role, and I love that game next week. So name that salary for Mike Davis in week 4.
That's a tough one. I'm probably going to be too low on this, but frankly, with that workload, with the receptions he can get, or the targets, I should say, it's really difficult to put him on that plane of like David Johnson's in like the upper 6s, but I'd probably go 66. Is that too high, too low? I don't know. I never know.
Given the game environments for each player, I actually think Mike Davis is pretty equal to Austin Eckler. I know that's an egregious statement, but like that's where we're at. I would have paid 73, and I know that's a very stupid statement.
You're always super high on these backs.
It's for 1 week.
I understand that, but
Wayne Gallman went off last year. We were right.
I'm saying, okay, you have to think like I understand what you will pay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying though.
But you have to I'm
not guessing where he's going to be. I'm saying that's what I think his role dictates he should be.
Well, this guy didn't play, so we're not going to talk about him yet. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire is 74 next week.
Okay, well he's undersalaried. That's not a good argument. It's a stupid argument.
When are we talking about Arizona? After this awesome game here.
Yeah, what's Kenyon Drake's salary?
He is 7,000. So Drake or Davis? I
mean Drake, but
but Kenyon Drake's not going to be like 78. So
every running back on FanDuel is under salary. There, I said it. Boom. Mike Davis is going to be under salaried. He is. I saw Mike Thomas, and it was $8,800. Like, oh my gosh, he's 63.
He's 63.
He's been playing for cash games at that number. I don't care.
Okay,
sue me. Right now, Mike Davis or Austin Eckler, who you got in week 4?
Mike Davis, but that's not my.
You can't.
Mike Davis, but that's not my only concern. Like, there are going to be other backs, like David Johnson or Mike Davis. When we know David Johnson is 67.
I know Mike Davis is going to get targets.
That's fair. That's fair.
Trying to bait you into the Eckler one. Oh, well, I tried. Let's move to Tampa Bay and Denver. This one was pretty lacking in anything exciting for fantasy, but did contain another potential injury, which stinks because we haven't gotten to see this Tampa Bay offense in full form for a full game yet. Chris Godwin hurt his hamstring in the third quarter and did not return. Now, it's worth noting they were up 28-10 at the time, so it's possible it's nothing, but we'll have to keep an eye on that one going forward. Rob Gronkowski did kind of spring back to life, 7 targets, which led the team. It was still just 48 yards. He did run 27 routes, up from a season high of 23 previously. O.J. Howard ran a season low, 13 routes. I don't want either guy, but obviously Gronk would be the preferred option between the two. Gronk is not in play for DFS, at least for me as of yet, just questioning if there's a path upside there. Ronald Jones seemed to regain the top spot in the running back pecking order here. Jones had 13 carries and 4 targets for 51% of the snaps. Fournette played 37% of the snaps. 7 carries and 2 targets. No thank you to either guy in DFS at those workloads. And we're talking about DFS, so I'm not going to talk about season long because my Fournette dynasty teams are not great, Bob. This is a good game for Tom Brady once he finally had Godwin and Evans healthy for most of the game. He had 0.34 passing net expected points per dropback, an 8.3 yard average depth of targets with a 21% deep rate. Obviously, no AJ Bouye does shift expectations for the Denver defense, but it's a good offense for fantasy in the right conditions. We just need Godwin and Evans both healthy, and then we can potentially go to Brady in DFS. Because I liked what I saw from him on Sunday, and he looked a lot better than the stat line showed in week 3 or week 2. Just had a bunch of drops there. The Broncos missed Drew Lock here for sure because he's awesome. Jeff Driscoll lost 6.71 passing net expected points on 30 dropbacks. Eventually benched for Brett Rippon. It's going to be a bad offense. That plus the likely return of Phillip Lindsay makes it hard to get in on Melvin Gordon. He had 8 carries and 6 targets. So the backfield here is in a holding pattern until Lock is back. The quarterbacks did at least funnel targets to Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant, which is fun. Fant had 10 targets, 1 deep and 1 in the red zone. Jeudy had 9 targets with 1 deep and 1 in the red zone. So if you want to go at this passing offense, those are the clear top 2. I just don't think I'll want to go here unless a matchup is a dream or until Drew Lock is back. So
well,
get back to Drew. Uh-oh.
I mean, they're Thursday night. It's Broncos-Jets.
How are they 3-point favorites? So I almost burst out laughing because I pulled up the spreads. We were about to start recording. I know the Jets stink. I know that. But do people realize that the Bengals' 5th-string wide receiver is playing quarterback for the Broncos? I refuse to bet on the Jets. I did it last year, and it was okay, but I refuse. However, if you're more courageous than me, you should bet the Jets +3.
I'm still going to watch that game, so I mean, I can't even joke about it.
Yeah. Sam Darnold or Jeff Driscoll? Don't answer that. Let's go to Detroit at Arizona. What'd you see in this one?
Definitely wasn't the game I anticipated, but still 49 total points. The Lions did win, which kind of skewed some things, especially for my Kenyon Drake shares, but they did it in a really annoyingly balanced way with 27 rushes and 31 pass attempts in Kenny Gallarde's return. Got to get it out of the way. Adrian Peterson, 22 of the 27 carries for 75 yards. He now has 14, 7, and 22 rushes so far. No touchdowns, 4 total targets, so that's not good enough, but he has ruined the rest of the backfield. He played 60% of snaps in week 3. In Kenny Gallarde's return, he tied for a team-high 7 targets with TJ Hawkinson, but 9 different Lions had a target out of 31 such pass attempts. That's tough. Matthew Stafford was efficient, but just 2 downfield targets, both to Gallarde. Gallarde compiled 76 air yards for a 10.9 yard average target depth. Got 2 red zone targets, though, as well, same as Jesse James. So that's unfortunate for those of us with TJ Hawkinson. The snaps were kind of what I would expect. 91% for Marvin Jones, who does play a lot of snaps whenever he's healthy. 82% for Hawkinson. 73% for Kenny Gallarde. Not quite 100%. These are the only 3 relevant Lions outside of Stafford on a full slate. Marvin Jones, just 3 targets, but he's going to be boom or bust. He's not a cash game play ever, so don't really change my expectations there. They host the Saints next week. They should probably have to abandon the run, throw to Gallarde and Marvin Jones. They are 4-point home underdogs in that one. Kyler Murray, a little rough. 0 passing net expected points per dropback, now at 0.04 on the year. Current league average for 2020 is 0.15, so well off the mark. He's below average in downfield attempt rate, but he runs a ton, and that is a fantasy cheat code. 8.7 rushes per game with at least 1 rushing score in every game so far. And the market shares here, I don't want to overreact because there was no Christian Kirk, but DeAndre Hopkins understandably got fed 12 targets for 137 yards and no touchdowns, so a fade didn't really ruin you. Who did score was Andy Isabella, which he did twice on 4 targets. Of note, Keyshawn Johnson had 7 targets, but just 2 catches. Johnson and Hopkins each had 2 downfield looks, with Johnson having a 16-yard average target depth. If Kirk were to miss, Johnson's probably the guy who gets the downfield work. Isabella probably earned more playing time regardless, but played just 40% of the snaps. I know he scored twice, but if you told me Andy Isabella, for as much as I like him and as much as a lot of Twitter likes him, if you told me he played 40% of snaps, I wouldn't really have gotten there no matter what, unless it was like the 4 p.m. only slate. Kenyon Drake, another...
It's quite nice to the 4 p.m. only slate, I will say.
Yeah, I bet. But, I mean, just it wasn't something that I want to chase, honestly. Kenyon Drake, another underwhelming game despite some volume. 18 carries and a single target for 20 adjusted opportunities. He's now at 21.3 per game. That's in like the Todd Gurley, James Robinson range, which is just not what I would want to see. He is fending off Chase Edmonds, but definitely not a workhorse. He's just kind of like a plus featured back in a committee in a offense that should score, should move the ball, should run plays. Snap rate's been there, 65% or more in every game, but no more than 71%. So I'm going to go back to Kenyon Drake for sure at the Panthers next week with that 51.5 point total. Anything that jumps out to you here?
The role is weird with Drake because like he is a really talented pass catcher, but like I get it because you can spell him there. Chase Edmonds is also really good in the passing game, so it's not like you're losing a ton. It's just like it's strange. If you had told me that there would be an issue with Kenyon Drake this year in fantasy, I would not have expected it to be the pass catching. So I think it's concerning because like we talked about it last week, like Chase Edmonds ran more routes last week than Kenyon Drake. So it's not like it's some fluke, but like I'm still there, especially because their schedule coming up is really good. Next week is amazing. He could do really well in a Nick Chubb type role against this Panthers defense. It's just like, it's annoying. That's the only word I have for it. It's annoying.
Yeah, it is. It's frustrating because it's one of those spots where it's like the process is good. Unless the Kyler Murray-led offense isn't really as good as we think, the passing efficiency hasn't been good. He made a lot of bad throws in week 3. But, I mean, in these good spots, it's really hard to avoid Kenyon Drake with, 65 to 70% of the snaps. He can catch the ball. I'm just going to keep going there.
I'm too. And just kind of hope the pass catching gets there. I think that's where I'm at right now with Kenyon Drake. Let's move now to Dallas at Seattle, a hyped up game that actually did live up to the billing, mostly because they continue to let Russ cook. He had another 5 passing touchdowns here. He also ran 6 times for 22 yards. He is, for fantasy, in the same tier right now as Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. And that's really, really hard to do. So Russell Wilson, awesome. And even better is we know where the ball is going. It doesn't matter if you went with DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett because both had 100 yards. They both had at least 1 touchdown. They both almost had 2, but DK Metcalf didn't want that first tutty. Lockett was the guy to have here, but both these guys are going to go nuts. Through the first 3 games, Lockett has 30% of the overall targets. Metcalf has 56% of the deep targets, and Russ is throwing deep a lot and efficiently. So Lockett has a better floor. Metcalf has a better yardage upside, and both can score touchdowns. So I'm keeping these two relatively even, and we'll just use whoever I expect to be less popular. I'm going to give it to you right now, Brandon. Like, is that a bad way to view this? Do you have a definitive take one over the other, or can we just go where the public is not going?
I think they're usually going to be similar, though, because if we like the offense, it's really easy to like both. But you said what I said last week, which is I think Lockett has the floor. Metcalf, I don't even want to say the ceiling, but just a lot more volatility because of the downfield work.
Volatility is good because we know we can hit the high end of his range of outcomes. So volatility there is a positive. But yeah, I think that it's
yes,
they're fun.
So long as he goes the extra, 5 yard. I mean, he gave up on that one at like the 5. It wasn't even like the inch line.
Are they the most fun team in DFS right now?
I think so.
I agree.
Yeah, they've plagued us for years because we wanted to go at Russ, but
it's fun to actually be able to do it and feel good about myself. I love this. Chris Carson had looked really good early on, but then he sprained his knee and did not return. That could lead to a lot of Carlos Hyde if Carson misses time. But Hyde has just 3 targets in 3 games. He'd be a pretty tough sell on getting passing game work. Mike Upati got banged up in this game too. One of the other guards, I think Damian Lewis, got banged up too. So the early down work would be valuable in this offense if it were to come, but it'd be an icky range of outcomes for Hyde if he weren't to get passing down work. So just go with the receivers. Dak Prescott was in a negative game script here and had to play without Tyron Smith, but he was up to the task, 0.16 passing net expected points per dropback. In that situation with 2 undrafted free agents at tackle on the road with a negative script, I'll take that. So the offense has been good, but it could be even better when Tyron Smith returns. So the Cowboys also one of the most fun offenses in DFS. Unfortunately, it was Cedric Wilson who kind of stole the show here. He had 2 touchdowns. Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb are both scoreless, while Michael Gallup had 1. Wilson did this on just 21 routes. That's compared to 58 for Gallup and 54 for Cooper. CeeDee Lamb had 40. Lamb's the only guy whose snap count went back a bit with Wilson popping up, and that's enough for me to put Gallup ahead of Lamb on the stacking list. But he's still third behind Amari and Zeke. Amari has had at least 9 targets in every game so far. He's had no deep targets, or he had no deep targets in week 3, but he had 4 last week. Zeke is now second on the team in targets at 16%. So the stacking rankings here are with Dak are Amari. Yeah, stack Dak with himself. Amari, Zeke, Gallup, Lamb. Dalton Schultz ran 4 fewer routes than Lamb, which is why he winds up behind Lamb for me. And Zeke's efficiency was bad, but he's getting big volume. And like Dak, he'll benefit when Tyron Smith returns. And I still think that for the time being, Zeke might be the top fantasy running back until McCaffrey returns. Alvin Kamara is a pretty strong 1A or 1B, but I think Zeke's right up there. So very much in this offense, but the receivers will still be pretty frustrating because you kind of have to pick right, and that's not easy. But I think Amari, you just kind of go Amari or Zeke if you want to avoid that. Yeah, I think that's where I'm at right now. Are you differing at all in the Cowboys receivers?
No, I think it's the same. We just mentioned how the Seahawks are like the most fun team in DFS. It's because other good offenses have market share concerns or at least question marks. I think back to like the Chiefs, as much as it is fun, although the Chiefs are like never on the main slate. As much as it's fun to play Patrick Mahomes and his pass catchers, you don't know if it's going to be, Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce or Demarcus Robinson. I get the same vibe with the Cowboys. I don't get that vibe as much with the Seahawks, which makes them just the favorite. And I'm with you on Zeke. He would be the first place I look each and every week at this point.
Alrighty, let's move on to the Sunday night game and talk about the other guy who was in that discussion, Alvin Kamara, going nuts. The Lizard King also having a big game. What'd you see in this one, Brandon?
Yeah, despite no Devonte Adams, Packers won. They're 3-0. They did not need him because they have Allen Lazard, the Lizard King, as you mentioned. 6 catches on 8 targets for 146 yards and a touchdown. Behind him in targets were Robert Tonyan with 5, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Aaron Jones with 4. Lazard had a pair of downfield looks as well. Over the past 2 weeks now, Devonte played about half the snaps last week. The target share leaders are Lazard at 21%, Aaron Jones at 19%, Marquez Valdes-Scantling at 18%, and Robert Tonyan at 13%. Valdes-Scantling has a really high ADOT at 16.6 yards. The snap rate was up in week 3 at 92%. I think he's sneaky whenever we want to play the Packers, but if Devonte misses, more and more time, it's going to be Lazard number 1 for me. He played 95% of the snaps. Speaking of snaps, Aaron Jones played 71% on Sunday Night Football. That led to 16 carries, 69 yards, and a touchdown, as well as those 4 targets for another 17 yards. His snap rates are now 54%, 48 and 71% through 3 games. He has averaged 6 targets per game. So, it's a really good role. It's different than how I viewed Aaron Jones last year, which is not what I expected with, the A.J. Dillon draft pick. I thought I would hate Aaron Jones in DFS, but really not the case. So I like Aaron Jones a good bit. They are not on the main slate. They play Monday night against the Falcons. For the Saints, Alvin Kamara, starting to be a tough fade again. 14 targets, 139 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a bit of a comeback script. No other Saint had more than Traquan Smith, 6 targets. Only Emmanuel Sanders had more than 3, while Michael Thomas missed again. So I don't want to dig too deep into the market shares here because it sounds like Michael Thomas really wants to play next week. But Kamara, 6 carries. Latavius Murray had 12. But, Alvin looks so dynamic when he gets the ball in his hands. 67% snap rate, in line with what he played the first 2 weeks. Again, no Michael Thomas for the second straight week. It hasn't even led to anything really bankable in terms of usage. Traquan Smith would be the guy for me with an 18% target share. After that, it's 11% shares for Jared Cook, Manny Sanders, and Deontay Harris. And so I don't really want to go there. It's kind of Michael Thomas and Kamara for me. And I know that, we're picking on Drew Brees when we talk about his downfield work, and he's an efficient veteran quarterback, but he had a single pass go at least 16 yards downfield last night. Not shockingly, lowest downfield attempt rate of any quarterback who's played at least 3 games. It's a problem for me for the offense if the skill players have to do all the work after the catch. Andres Pete got carted off last night. I'm sure you know a lot more about that impact than I do, but I think it's just kind of Kamara for me until Michael Thomas is back here.
Yeah, I've tried to force Jared Cook. It's not working. That's disappointing. Yeah, I think that Kamara, I love it. So let's talk about salaries next week. They're at the Lions. How high is too high for Alvin Kamara?
Probably too high is anything above 9,000. But I would probably still consider him there.
I think 95 would be kind of too high.
We're always way far apart on running back salaries.
I mean, there's a reason we always put running backs in the flex. It's because they're always undersalaried, I think. Kamara is 88. So pick one. Zeke at home against Cleveland or Kamara on the road against Detroit?
Zeke, because I love the offense more.
If Tyron Smith is back, I say Zeke. If not, I say Kamara. I think they're both awesome, though. And I feel like we'll be trying to find ways to get in both this week, and I would love to do so.
Well, hey, your boy Mike Davis is his salary is about 3,000 too low, so.
Yeah. The Rams defense is also about 3,000 too low, so we're getting good discounts here, and I'll take that. But I think that Zeke and Kamara are going to be focal points for the Week 4 main slate. We're going to be back here on Thursday to get you set for said main slate. That is at 10 a.m. on the FanDuel YouTube page. We'll also be posting it on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed immediately after that fact. So make sure you are subscribed in both those places, on the FanDuel YouTube page and on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck with your Week 4 lineups if you get there, or with the single game Monday night slate tonight. Hopefully get to 75 points and get those refunds, because they're going to offer it. Might as well take it. We'll talk to you again on Thursday. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.